Okay, so you've got a ton of information in front of you and you really want to understand it all, but it seems like there's never enough time, right? We all feel that.
Yeah.
But today, we're going to take a deep dive into a method of learning that can make things a bit easier and more effective. It's actually rooted in Japanese culture and emphasizes making the most of your study time.
Yes, exactly. And I think what makes this so interesting is that uh, it's not just a bunch of generic tips that you might find anywhere else. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's a very specific philosophy and a set of strategies that work together to really create like this powerful learning system.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And that learning system is coming from a document called El Método Japonés para Estudiar 10 veces más rápido, which translates to the Japanese method for studying 10 times faster. So in this deep dive, we're on a mission to extract the absolute gold from this document and these Japanese techniques. And hopefully we can help you guys listening at home learn not just faster, but also deeper line. We're not just looking for you to get acquainted with the material we're looking for, that real understanding, the real aha moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if we zoom out a bit, what we're really talking about here is that shift from feeling overwhelmed by information to really feeling in control of it.
Right.
Like you have a system that allows you to navigate this information effectively.
Yeah, a system that empowers you to learn better.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's get into the specifics here. The document starts by laying out a few foundational principles, and one that really stood out to me was this concept of Kaizen. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So Kaizen basically translates to change for the better. And the idea is that you make small incremental improvements each and every day. And when we apply this to the world of studying, what we're really talking about is cultivating learning habits that are both effective and sustainable over the long run. So it's the opposite of those, late night cram sessions that leave you feeling burnt out and like you haven't really absorbed anything.
Right, it's about consistency in small steps rather than trying to run a marathon the night before the race.
Yeah, exactly.
So how can we actually take this Kaizen approach and make it work for us in our daily study routine? What would that look like?
Yeah, so one practical way to implement this is to break down your study goals into smaller daily actions. So instead of having this huge, overwhelming task, you break it down into these manageable chunks.
Right.
And what's amazing about this is that each small improvement builds on the last one. So even if it seems insignificant on its own, the cumulative effect over time is huge.
Right, it's like compound interest, but for knowledge.
Exactly.
So instead of, I need to conquer this entire textbook, it's today I'm going to really make sure I understand this one section.
Yeah.
So what else would this look like in practice?
Well, another key element is setting goals that are specific, realistic, and measurable.
Okay.
So instead of something vague like, I need to study more, you'd say something like, I'm going to finish all the practice problems in Chapter 3 by the end of today's study session.
That's much more concrete.
Yes, and this is crucial. The document emphasizes the importance of reflection. So at the end of each study session, you take a few minutes to just review what you accomplished, what went well, and maybe what you might want to tweak for your next study session.
So it's like a little debrief after each session to constantly be improving your approach.
Exactly.
And I can also imagine keeping some sort of record of this process would be really helpful, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The document actually suggests keeping a study journal or using one of the many tracking apps available. And this not only gives you a sense of achievement, which can be a huge motivator, but it also allows you to spot patterns in your learning, like what times of day are you most focused?
Right.
Or what subjects do you tend to struggle with more?
Right.
This kind of data can be so valuable for personalizing your approach.
Okay, so the takeaway here with Kaizen is to make continuous small improvements that build momentum and prevent you from feeling overwhelmed. And this ultimately leads to more effective learning that really sticks with you.
Exactly.
Okay, so the next technique has to do with how we manage our time and keep our energy levels up.
Right.
It's a combination of the Pomodoro technique and something called active breaks.
Right.
So first, can you tell us what is the Pomodoro technique?
Yeah. So the Pomodoro technique is a time management method that's designed to keep you focused and to prevent mental burnout. The basic principle is to work in focused blocks of time, usually around 25 to 50 minutes, followed by short scheduled breaks of like 5 to 10 minutes.
Right. And I actually noticed that the document mentions some flexibility in those intervals.
Right.
So you can kind of adjust them based on what works best for you. Is that pretty common?
Yeah, absolutely. So while the classic Pomodoro is 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off, our source acknowledges that everyone's concentration span is different. Some people might be able to focus deeply for 50 minutes and then need a 10-minute break. The key is to experiment and find a rhythm that keeps you engaged without hitting that wall.
Makes sense. So, and these breaks are intentional, right? You're not just scrolling through social media.
Oh, no.
It specifically says active breaks. So what would those look like?
Right, so with active breaks, you're choosing to step away from your studies and to refresh both your mind and body.
Right.
So this could involve doing some deep breathing exercises, stretching, taking a quick walk, or just looking away from your screen and focusing on something in the distance. The goal is to do something different that helps you come back to your studies feeling more alert.
Okay, so it's this cycle of concentration and then rejuvenation. It sounds like a really smart way to stay focused and improve your retention without getting completely drained.
Exactly.
Okay, so moving on to a slightly different concept. This one is more of a learning philosophy than a specific technique, and it comes from Japanese martial arts. It's called Shu Ha Ri. So can you tell us what that is and how it applies to learning?
Yeah, sure. So Shu Ha Ri is a framework that outlines the journey from beginner to mastery in any skill or discipline. And when we apply this to studying, it breaks down into 3 distinct phases. The first phase is Shu, which means learn or obey.
Okay.
And in this initial stage, the focus is on diligently following the rules, memorizing those basic concepts, and applying those proven study techniques. So it's all about building a solid foundation.
So you're really like a student in Shu. You're absorbing everything and trusting the established methods.
Yeah.
So what happens as you progress?
Well, the second stage is Ha, which means adapt or detach. And once you've built that strong foundation in Shu, you start to experiment with different approaches, and you start to tailor your learning to your own style.
Right.
So you're starting to move beyond just strict adherence to the rules.
Right. You're starting to understand why those rules work and how you can make them work for you.
Yeah, exactly. And then the final stage is Ri, which means innovate or transcend. And at this point, you've not only mastered the content, but you're actually developing your own original strategies and insights to really optimize your learning process.
Wow. So it's a real evolution from passively receiving information to actively shaping your learning journey.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the document really highlights this shift from rote memorization to this continuous process of growth.
That's a really cool way to look at it.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on, we have the Feynman technique, which sounds incredibly practical. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so the Feynman technique is a strategy for really ensuring that you understand a topic deeply.
Okay.
The basic idea is to explain the concept as if you were teaching it to someone who has no prior knowledge of the subject.
Okay, so like explaining it to a child.
Exactly. It's like the ultimate test, because if you can explain it simply, you really understand it.
Right. I like that because it really highlights those gaps in your knowledge where you think you know it, but you actually don't.
Exactly.
So how would we put the Feynman technique into practice? What are the steps?
Well, first, you choose the topic you want to understand, and you study it thoroughly.
Okay.
Then, you try to explain that concept out loud in your own words, as if you were talking to that beginner. And as you do that, you'll probably stumble upon areas where you realize your understanding isn't as clear as you thought it was.
Right.
And then you go back to your source material and you re-examine those concepts until they become clear, and then you refine your explanation, making it even simpler and using examples that someone new to the topic would understand.
So it's this iterative process of learning, explaining, identifying weaknesses, and then refining. So it's not just about memorizing, it's about really understanding the essence of what you're learning. Okay, now let's talk about memory. The document mentions memoria especiata, or spaced repetition, and this is often implemented using something called the Leitner system. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so the Leitner system is a spaced repetition technique that's designed to optimize how well we remember information over time.
Okay.
And it takes advantage of the way our memory naturally works.
Yeah.
You know, how we tend to forget things quickly if we don't review them.
Right, right.
Spaced repetition combats that by presenting information to us at increasing intervals right when we're about to forget it. And the Leitner system is a structured way to do that.
Okay, so it's all about the timing of the review.
Exactly.
So how does it work on a practical level? How would you actually use the Leitner system?
So typically you'd use flashcards with questions on one side and answers on the other, and then you organize these flashcards into different boxes or piles with each box representing a different review frequency. So for example, you might have a box for reviewing daily, another for every 3 days, then weekly, and so on. And as you review the cards, if you answer correctly, the card moves to the next less frequent review box.
Okay.
But if you get it wrong, it goes back to an earlier box.
So you're constantly reinforcing the things you find difficult, and you're spending less time on the things you've already mastered.
Exactly. It's a really efficient way to study.
It sounds like it. Okay, the next technique is pretty interesting. It's called Kakaibo Mental, which means mental knowledge management.
Yes.
Now, Kakaibo is usually associated with managing your finances. So how does this translate to studying?
Yeah, so just like Kakeibo helps you track and understand your money,
Huh.
Kakeibo Mental applies those same principles of organization and visualization to the information you're learning.
So instead of tracking where your money's going, you're tracking where your knowledge is going.
Exactly.
Okay, so how would this work in practice?
Well, the document suggests using visual tools like mind maps and diagrams to represent the information you're learning. This allows you to see the relationships between different ideas and to create a structure for the material. So you're breaking down complex topics into smaller categories, kind of like you would categorize your spending in traditional Kakaibo.
So you're creating like a visual architecture of your knowledge.
Exactly.
And what's the main benefit of this approach?
The main benefit is that it improves your understanding and retention, because by organizing information visually and mapping out the key ideas, you're creating a much clearer mental framework that makes it easier to recall and apply the information later on.
Right, and it encourages you to move beyond just taking linear notes and to really understand the connections between different ideas.
Exactly.
I can see how that would make complex topics seem less intimidating and more manageable.
Yeah.
Okay, and finally we have monotaria, which basically means single tasking.
Right.
Now this sounds pretty straightforward, but why is it so crucial for effective studying?
Well, even though it might seem obvious, multitasking actually has a huge impact on our ability to learn effectively. Yeah, our brains aren't really designed to handle multiple demanding tasks at the same time.
Right.
So when we try to multitask, we're actually just switching our attention back and forth really quickly, and this leads to a fragmented focus, and we don't understand or remember things as well.
So even if it feels like we're being productive by juggling multiple things at once, we're actually harming our learning.
Exactly. The document really stresses the importance of focusing on one task at a time during your study sessions.
Okay, so how can we embrace monotaria and minimize distractions while we're studying?
The source suggests a few things. So first, you want to actively eliminate distractions from your environment. So turn off your phone notifications, put away social media, and find a quiet space where you can focus.
Makes sense.
And second, you can use mindfulness techniques to train your attention and to gently bring it back whenever your mind starts to wander.
Okay, so it's about creating a focused environment and cultivating a focused mind.
Exactly.
And the reward for this is better comprehension and retention. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so this has been a really interesting deep dive into the Japanese method of studying. We've talked about Kaizen and the power of those small improvements. We talked about the Pomodoro technique with active breaks for maximizing focus and preventing burnout. We covered Shu Ha Ri and those stages of mastery. We explored the Feynman technique for achieving deep understanding. And we discussed Memoria Especiata and the Leitner system for optimizing your memory.
Right.
We also explored Kakaibo Mental for organizing your knowledge, and Monotaria, the importance of single tasking.
And I think what's really fascinating is that these different techniques actually work together. They all point towards this more disciplined, organized, and ultimately effective approach to learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for anyone listening, if you can even just try to incorporate one or two of these principles into your study habits, it could make a huge difference.
Absolutely. It's about making those small changes consistently.
Yeah, exactly. So think about your current learning habits and ask yourself, are there any opportunities to integrate some of these Japanese techniques into your routine?
Yeah, which of these methods really speaks to you and the challenges you're facing right now?
Exactly. And think about how those small improvements over time could lead to some major breakthroughs in your understanding of whatever it is you're trying to learn.
Exactly.
This is definitely something worth exploring.
Absolutely.
Okay, so until next time, happy learning, everyone.
Yes, happy learning.